My mother-in-law smashed my $3,200 shop display to prove I was nothing. So, I had her arrested, uncovered her secret, 15% ownership, and destroyed her entire life. I let the police arrest my own mother-in-law after she smashed my entire coffee shop display in front of 50 customers, screaming that I was absolutely nothing without her daughter. The crash sounded like a violent car accident happening inside my own shop. I was in the back office, elbow deep in a stack of vendor invoices, when I heard it, ceramic exploding against the hard tile. 50 conversations stopping at the exact same time, followed by a scream that cut through the silence, high, furious, and echoing. It was a voice I would know anywhere. I came out from behind the espresso machine, and the whole shop had gone completely still. Customers were frozen mid-sip, their mugs hovering halfway to their mouths. A barista's steam wand was still hissing uselessly into an abandoned pitcher of oat milk. My newest hire, Maya Lynn, 20 years old, was backed against the pastry case with both hands pressed tightly over her mouth. Her name tag was crooked, like she had grabbed at her own chest without meaning to. Shards of beautifully glazed ceramic covered the floor in a wide fan pattern, catching the morning light through the front windows and throwing small, bright reflections across the ceiling. One of the heavy mugs had caught a woman's shin on its way down. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the blood soaking into her leggings like she couldn't quite process what had just happened to her own leg. And in the middle of all of it stood Brenda, my mother-in-law, 63 years old, dressed like she was attending a country club luncheon instead of actively destroying a small business. Her chest was heaving. 3 of her book club friends clustered near the door, already backing toward the exit in sheer embarrassment. What happened? I asked. I kept my voice perfectly calm. I'd learned over the years that dead calm was the only thing that worked with Brenda. This incompetent little girl, Brenda spat, jabbing a manicured finger at Maya, told me to wait in line like a common customer. Maya's voice shook violently. I just asked her to go to the back of the line. That's it. That's all I said. That. I looked at the absolute wreckage on the floor. 6 broken mugs. Our entire hand-thrown seasonal display. The exact one I'd special ordered from a brilliant potter in Madison, Wisconsin, 3 months earlier. $2,800 gone in one single sweep of an arm. Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously low, did you do this? You ungrateful little nothing. She screamed, loud enough that the boutique 2 doors down probably heard her. You'd be nothing without my daughter. Nothing, do you hear me? I didn't answer her. I simply pulled my phone out of my apron pocket and dialed 911. Her face changed the absolute instant she heard me say the word dispatch. The fiery fury drained out of her features, and something much colder slid in behind it. She backed toward a leather chair, pressed one hand dramatically to her chest, and started gasping like she was having a massive heart attack in front of 50 witnesses who, 10 seconds earlier, had watched her destroy my property with both hands and a perfectly clear head. I didn't move a single inch to help her. I stood there holding a broom, and I waited. That was the exact moment everything after this story started from. Not the broken mugs, not the screaming, but the moment I realized I was never going to protect this woman anymore, no matter what it cost me at the Thanksgiving dinner table. To understand how we got to this ridiculous point, you have to go back 6 years to the very first time I ever sat across a dining table from Brenda Whitfield and watched her send back a glass of tap water because the ice cubes weren't uniform in size. I was 31 back then. I'd been dating Chloe for 8 months, and she had finally worked up the nerve to bring me to a family dinner at her parents' house in Oak Park, the kind of upscale Chicago neighborhood with brick sidewalks, mature oak trees, and property taxes that made my stomach physically hurt. Chloe had warned me in the car ride over. My mom is a lot, she had said, gripping the steering wheel. Just don't take it personally. She's not always like this. She was always like that. I just didn't know it yet. Brenda greeted me at the heavy oak door with a smile that didn't move past her mouth. She looked me up and down exactly once. The way you'd assess a cheap used car, and said, so, you're the coffee boy. At the time, I was managing a local cafe for someone else, saving every single spare dollar toward the dream of opening my own place. Chloe had explicitly told her mother I was an aspiring business owner, but Brenda had chosen to hear coffee boy. Dinner went the exact way I'd later learn all Whitfield family dinners went. Brenda sent the water back twice. She interrogated the poor waiter about a coupon that had expired the previous spring, insisting the restaurant honor it anyway because of her loyalty. And when the young manager politely declined, she demanded to speak to someone above him. There was no one above him. She asked anyway. Chloe's father, Arthur, a retired civil engineer with the permanently tired eyes of a man who'd been married to Brenda for 36 years, said almost nothing the entire meal. He passed the breadbasket. He nodded at appropriate intervals. I understood, watching him silently chew his steak, that I was looking at my own miserable future if I wasn't incredibly careful. Chloe caught my eye twice that night, mouthing, "I'm sorry," across the table. I didn't mind, not really. I naively thought Brenda was simply particular. High maintenance, the kind of wealthy woman who'd mellow with time once she trusted me and saw that I made her daughter happy. I was wrong about almost all of that. It took me even longer to understand what it had been like to grow up as Brenda's daughter rather than simply date into her chaotic orbit as a full-grown adult. Chloe told me months into our relationship about a childhood spent constantly managing her mother's erratic moods. She learned terrifyingly early which subjects were safe and which ones would trigger a freezing cold shoulder that could last for days. Chloe had been a competitive swimmer in high school, good enough to draw serious college athletic interest, until Brenda decided the early morning practice schedule was a personal insult to family time, and pressured her into quitting during her junior year. Chloe had internalized long before I ever met her that love from her mother came with heavy conditions, attached emotional invoices she wouldn't see the full total of until years later. Understanding that dark history didn't excuse anything Brenda did to me or to our marriage, but it helped me understand why Chloe found it so impossibly hard for so long to hold a firm boundary with her own mother. She'd spent 18 years learning that firm lines got severely punished. The engagement, when it came a year and a half later, brought its own terrifying preview of what was coming. Chloe and I had picked a small guest list on purpose. 40 people, a backyard string of warm lights, catered tacos, nothing that required a second mortgage. Brenda had entirely other plans. She showed up to our first planning dinner with a literal 3-ring binder, tabbed by vendor category, and informed us she'd already placed a non-refundable deposit on a venue we'd never even seen. A massive banquet hall in Evanston that seated 200 people. When Chloe told her, as gently as she knew how, that it wasn't the wedding we wanted, Brenda set her salad fork down. She stared at us coldly and said she supposed the family diamond, her own mother's ring, the one she'd always promised would be reset for Chloe's wedding day, would have to go to Chloe's sister Sophie instead. Since apparently my opinion doesn't matter here. Chloe cried in the car afterward. Not because she particularly wanted the ring, but because the shape of the threat was so deeply familiar to her. The withholding of something valuable, dressed up as a natural consequence of disrespect. We kept our small wedding. The ring never came up again until Sophie's own engagement 3 years later, when Brenda, true to her toxic word, gave it to her instead and told anyone who asked that Chloe never really wanted it anyway. We got married 2 years later in October. 3 years ago, I finally opened Copper Kettle Coffee on a busy corner storefront that had been a failed bookstore for 2 years before I secured the lease. I'd spent 11 months hunting for the right space before that one, walking away from 3 different leases when the math didn't make sense. I put every single dollar I had into it. $68,000 of my own life savings, a small business loan for another $40,000, and exhausting 80-hour weeks that Chloe somehow tolerated without ever once making me feel guilty for missing dinners. Opening week, we sold out of pastries by 10 in the morning, 3 days running. I remember standing in the walk-in cooler at midnight, restocking milk for the next day, so physically tired I could barely see straight, thinking I had never been happier in my entire life. Chloe believed in the shop before it made a single dollar of profit. She believed in it when the walk-in cooler completely died in our second month, and I didn't know how the hell we'd cover the massive emergency repair. That's actually when the money came from Brenda and Arthur. I want to be entirely honest about that now because, at the time, I only understood half of it. And the half I didn't understand is the half that matters most to this entire nightmare. Chloe told me her parents had generously offered us a loan, $48,000 to cover the new commercial cooler and a badly needed renovation of the kitchen line. I was proud, and prouder still that I hadn't had to beg for it. I blindly signed what Chloe told me was a simple promissory note. I didn't read every single page. I trusted my wife completely. That blind trust would come back around to bite me in ways I couldn't have ever predicted. Here's the earlier incident that, looking back now, was glaring foreshadowing I completely missed. About 8 months after we opened, Brenda started showing up on Saturday mornings, our absolute busiest window, without ever ordering anything at first. She'd walk straight past the line of 20 people, straight up to the counter, and announce to whichever employee was working the register, "I basically own this place. My son-in-law works for me." Then she'd demand a large vanilla latte and an almond croissant and walk off with them. No payment, no tip jar drop, absolutely nothing. The first time it happened, I laughed it off as Brenda just being entitled Brenda. The third time, I pulled her aside near the roasting machine and asked her gently to please wait in line like everyone else. She looked at me like I'd physically slapped her across the face. "I helped save this business," she hissed. "The least you could do is let your own family have a damn coffee." I didn't push it that day. I told myself it was a small thing. A few free drinks a week wasn't worth the nuclear family war it would take to stop it. That's the tragic mistake so many of us make with narcissistic people like Brenda. We think the cost of setting boundaries is bigger than the cost of having no boundaries at all. It never is, it just takes longer to see the final bill. The escalation, once it really started, didn't feel like escalation at the time. The first real step came about a year into the business when I set a firm policy: no family exceptions, no free drinks, full stop. It applied to everyone, including my own wife when she came in on her lunch break. I told Brenda directly over the phone. From now on, you're a customer like anyone else, I said. I love you being there, I just need you to pay like everybody else. She was quiet for a second. So that's how it is, she said, after everything we did for you. Fine. I understand exactly what I am to you now. She hung up. For 6 weeks, she was a perfect customer. I actually let myself believe the boundary had worked. The corner she turned out to be a straight line back to hell. In late October, Brenda came in with her entire book club, 7 women. Instead of ordering as a group, she had each woman place a separate order, paying full price. Then it was her turn. She ordered 2 lattes, a dozen expensive macarons, and a loaf of our specialty sourdough, and told the register girl, a college kid named Zoe, that she'd be paying the family rate. When Zoe, utterly confused, said she didn't know what that meant, Brenda sighed loudly enough for the whole crowded line to hear and said, "Just ring it up as employee comp, sweetheart. My son-in-law will sort his mess out later." And she walked off with the bag. When I called her that night to confront her, she flatly denied it. "I didn't test anyone," she said smoothly. "I paid for my own coffee like I always do." She denied reality without a flicker of hesitation. The second step came when Brenda started inserting herself into my staffing decisions. I'd hired a brilliant barista named Jace. He was a college kid with 3 visible arm tattoos and an easy, charming way with customers. Brenda took one look at him and told me unprompted that he gave off the wrong energy for the neighborhood and that I should fire him immediately before he attracted thugs. I told her his employment wasn't up for discussion. She brought it up 4 more times. The last time, she came in on a Friday evening, waited until Jace was wiping down the espresso machine within earshot, and said loudly, "I just think it's a shame you'd rather keep someone like that than listen to your own family." Jace's jaw tightened, and he blinked hard. I walked Brenda out to the sidewalk and told her if she ever disrespected my staff again, she was banned. She played the victim beautifully to Chloe for weeks after that. The 4th step involved my daughter, Mia. Mia was 3 at the time. Brenda started showing up unannounced at Mia's daycare, picking her up early without telling us. The worst of it came on a Tuesday. Chloe arrived at 5:15 p.m., and Mia wasn't there. The director apologetically said Grandma had signed her out at 3 p.m. Chloe called Brenda's phone 4 times, no answer. She called me, her voice cracking in absolute terror. I left mid-shift, ready to call the police. Brenda finally answered my 3rd call from a nail salon, completely unbothered, Mia coloring quietly beside her. "I just missed her," she scoffed. "Is it a crime to spend time with my own granddaughter?" 2 weeks later, a daycare teacher mentioned that Mia had said something disturbing during nap time. "Grandma says Mommy and Daddy don't want Grandma around anymore." That was the moment I understood we weren't dealing with someone merely difficult. We were dealing with someone who would weaponize a toddler without blinking. There were other things. Strange calls from a man named Marcus Vance asking for my quarterly financial statements, which I assumed was a loan scam. Brenda using an old spare key to sneak into the shop after hours to rewrite our menu board to include Brenda's Autumn Delight price $2 higher than anything else. Which brings me back to that Saturday morning. The morning the line wrapped around the block. The morning, Brenda decided to demand 6 drinks and a dozen pastries for free, loudly announcing her ownership of a business she did not own. The police officers arrived exactly 5 minutes after my 911 call. 2 of them, an older officer named Miller and a younger one named Davis. Brenda ran to them the second they stepped through the door, sobbing hysterically, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He attacked me," she wailed. "I'm terrified of him, please help me." I didn't argue. I asked Officer Miller to step into my back office and pulled up the security footage. 4 camera angles, crystal clear, time-stamped. Brenda screaming at Maya, me walking up calmly. Brenda's arm sweeping deliberately across the counter, shattering the $2,800 display. Brenda laughing maliciously 2 seconds later, before remembering to look afraid. Miller watched it twice. He walked back out to the front, pulled the handcuffs off his belt, and said, "Brenda Whitfield, you're under arrest for criminal mischief and disorderly conduct." Her face broke apart. She started thrashing, screaming my name, screaming that we were family, that I owed her. I stood there with the broom, sweeping shards of ceramic into a dustpan, and told Officer Davis I was pressing full charges and issuing a permanent trespass order. They walked her out in handcuffs past 50 silent customers. One older man actually clapped. Update 1. She sat in a holding cell for 14 hours before Arthur finally bailed her out. Chloe didn't go. That night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 4 words, "You will regret this." I thought it was just an empty threat. I was horribly wrong. 3 days later, I unlocked the shop before sunrise. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. Someone had spray painted across our massive front window in dripping, thick red letters, "This is mine too." Taped beneath it, protected in a plastic sleeve, was a printed document, several pages stapled together with a section highlighted in yellow and a signature circled in the same red marker. I recognized the signature instantly. Brenda's looping, deliberate handwriting. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I read the document. It was a contract dated 3 years earlier, the exact same month we'd fixed the walk-in cooler. It was titled, Investment and Consultation Agreement. My name was on it, Chloe's name was on it, and Brenda's name was on it. Not as a lender. As a minority equity holder, she owned 15% of Copper Kettle Coffee. And the highlighted clause granted her reasonable consultation rights on customer-facing business decisions and quarterly access to financial statements upon request. I suddenly understood exactly who Marcus Vance was, and why he'd been calling me for 3 years. The $48,000 hadn't been a family loan. It was an aggressive corporate investment. Brenda hadn't been delusional when she told my staff she owned the place. She had been telling the weaponized truth, and I was the only idiot who hadn't known. I called Chloe. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped my keys. "Get to the shop right now," I said. She was there in 10 minutes. I watched the color completely drain from her face when she saw the red paint and the plastic sleeve. I saw an expression I'd never seen on her before. It wasn't surprise. It was pure, suffocating guilt. "You knew?" I said. It wasn't a question. Chloe started crying immediately. "When the cooler died, we needed the money in 4 days or we were going to lose the shop." She sobbed. My mom insisted on drawing up something formal. I thought it was just to protect the loan. I didn't understand what the consultation clause actually meant, until Marcus started calling. "I was so terrified of you finding out. I thought I could just quietly save up and buy her out before you ever had to know. I'm so sorry." I was absolutely furious at Brenda, but I was deeply, profoundly hurt by Chloe. She was 31, terrified of her abusive mother, and she had made a panicked decision that she spent 3 years quietly regretting. But it still felt like a massive betrayal. We hired a brutal business litigator named Sarah Jenkins the very next morning. Sarah read the contract, highlighting sections and muttering, "That's aggressive." She told us plainly, the 15% stake was legally ironclad. The consultation clause was vague but gave Brenda enough standing to drag us through a miserable, expensive 18-month court battle if we tried to ignore her. "Your best path isn't proving her wrong," Sarah said. "It's buying her out entirely, cleanly. Get her out, pay fair market value, and sever the tie permanently." I asked Chloe if Brenda would ever agree to a buyout. Chloe looked at me with a newfound coldness in her eyes. "We need to make her family watch what she actually is first," she said. "Or she'll never agree. She'll play the victim forever." Update 2. We spent a week assembling a digital case file. We pulled the shop's security footage, the daycare's archived footage, and cross-referenced dates. We invited the entire family to Arthur and Brenda's house for a Sunday barbecue under the pretense of a normal visit. Chloe's brother Lucas and sister Sophie were there. Brenda was in dangerously good spirits. She'd been out on bond awaiting her criminal court date and was acting like nothing had happened. After lunch, I set my laptop on the coffee table. "I think it's time we talked about the shop," I said. Brenda's smile didn't waver. "There's nothing to talk about. I'm entitled to what I'm entitled to." "You are," I said calmly. "Legally. I've seen the secret contract now." Arthur set his coffee cup down slowly. "What contract?" I opened the laptop and hit play. I showed them everything. Brenda, using the spare key to change the menu board in the dead of night. Brenda at the daycare, telling 3-year-old Mia that her parents hated her. And finally, the crystal clear footage of Brenda intentionally smashing the $2,800 display, laughing maliciously, and then faking a heart attack for the cops. The living room went dead silent. "This is insulting," Brenda stammered, her voice shaking. "You're taking things out of context." "There is no context that makes any of this okay, Mom," Sophie whispered, her hands over her mouth in horror. Brenda turned on me, her face red with rage. "I gave you a business. You'd be a pathetic barista without me. You gave us a leash," I shot back. "And you used my 3-year-old daughter as a hostage to make sure I didn't pull too hard on it. I'm not playing this game anymore." Lucas stood up, his face tight with anger. "You did the exact same thing with the down payment on our house, Mom. $14,000, and for 2 years you held it over our heads every time we made a renovation decision you didn't like. I thought that was just how parents acted. Watching this, you're sick. You will regret this," Brenda hissed at me. "That was you," I said immediately, "the anonymous text message the night you got out of jail." She didn't deny it. Her silence was a screaming confession in front of her husband and children. Arthur finally spoke. His voice was incredibly quiet, carrying the weight of 36 years of enabling. "Brenda, did you send him a threatening text after you destroyed his store?" "He deserved it," she shrieked. "He humiliated me." Chloe stood up, towering over her mother. "I have spent my entire life making myself smaller, so you wouldn't feel threatened. I hid a legal contract from my own husband because I was more terrified of you than him. I am done. You are going to sell back your stake in Mark's business at a fair price. You are going to stop showing up at Mia's daycare. If you can't do that, you will never see any of us again." Arthur looked at me, his eyes filled with immense shame. I want to see the paperwork, he said. Tonight. I'll fund the buyout myself. The aftermath was a slow, devastating earthquake. Arthur read the contract with our lawyer and was so deeply embarrassed by the predatory clauses Brenda had snuck in that he didn't fight us at all. We bought her out for $62,000, a $14,000 premium over the actual value, just to get her out cleanly and quickly. The contract was shredded, replaced with a bulletproof non-disparagement agreement. Brenda didn't go quietly. She tried to call Lucas's wife to start drama. She tried calling Sophie crying every night until Sophie blocked her number. Brenda even had an anonymous woman call Maya's nursing school to falsely claim Maya was a thief. Luckily, I had warned Maya, and I wrote a glowing character reference letter that killed the fake investigation in a day. The criminal case resolved in late December. Faced with 50 witnesses and 4 camera angles, Brenda's lawyer forced her to plead guilty to lesser charges. She received probation, 40 hours of community service picking up trash on the highway, and was ordered to pay $3,800 in restitution for the display and the injured customer's medical bills. The judge also granted a permanent 2-year restraining order keeping her away from the shop. Arthur and Brenda officially separated in February. He told me over a cup of coffee that he didn't leave her specifically because of the shop, but because once he finally saw the monster she truly was on that laptop screen, he couldn't unsee it. Chloe and I spent 4 months in intensive couples counseling. We worked through the immense betrayal of the secret contract. I learned how deeply her trauma ran, and she learned how to finally stand as an equal partner rather than a frightened child. It's been almost a year now. The shop is thriving. We bought a sturdier display case. Maya is a shift lead now, practically running the floor on weekends. Arthur visits every Sunday, leaves a $5 tip on a $4 coffee, and sits quietly by the window. There's a small brass plaque bolted to the wall behind the register now. It's subtle, but I look at it every single morning when I unlock the front door. It says, "Built by us, for us." No secret contracts, no manipulation, just my family, my coffee, and my peace. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.